and of course to ensure that their international image comes across as a very human people who are upholding the human rights or humanity despite bombing. During, I was reading in one of the news where 26,000 times bombs were being, I think it was Yemen was the country from United States was gifted. So this entire tool of them using different kind of media is only perception management. Okay, coming to Pakistan, I often get this analogy from many people that Pakistan is doing this and Pakistan is doing that. I think my own defense forces and my own media and this complete political structure of my country, you may call me patriotic, I won't like to equate it at all. Reason being because my media gives freedom to everyone. My media gives a freedom for a small vendor who can speak about his plights to a celebrity. And if you see most of the news channels, they randomly pick people from streets and they say आपको कैसा महसूस हो सकता है वो प्रश्न गलत हो, लेकिन अगर आप उसको एक पूरे तरीके से देखें कि इतनी फ्रीडम है कि वो इंसान वही बोलना चाहता है जो वो सोच रहा है, जो वो समझ रहा है, which of course when we talk about ISPR, I'm pretty sure that this is not their intent. And secondly, when I see Indian media, we can criticize it, no doubt. The quality of report is bad, sensationalism is there, the reporters need to check their facts first, but a lot of discourse happens. And there can be some discourse, there can be a discourse which is, pushed by a majority population or a minority population, but it is still there. It is existing there, which is a very good sign of democracy. But I will not like to take example of Pakistan to begin with. Keeping in mind, we have ace reporters here who have brought, if you see during Kargil war, Praveen Swami have written 2 books on Kargil war. He was part of the conflict. Nitin Gokhale have done extensive work on bringing out conflict reporting. Or people from different, or Asha Khosam have written directly when this insurgency was happening. So I think our own media system is very robust. They do create so one thing that because it's a very TRP driven industry that we are having. But because the industry is TRP driven, that does not mean that the journalist who is reporting is less patriotic or less, is less in his principles. In fact, going back to my research, when I was doing my in-depth interviews with the reporters from conflict, they said we very much empathize with our armed forces. We always try to bring out their work, and they have done it. Yes, they are in a learning phase. They have to be trained more. They have to, but I have seen ace reporters who have done excellent reporting, be it Nitin Gokhale sir, be it Praveen Swami sir. It's evolving, and I think we will be learning in a due course of time. We are learning, and I think it should be the other way around. Pakistanis should learn how Indian media is working. So that will be my take on that.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. My motive of highlighting the role of how Pakistani media functions is to highlight the role of perception and how Pakistani media uses its channels, maybe its family media or social media, to mold the perception of individuals in the country, how they look at India, how they see the world around them. Maybe for them, some other country is good because they showcase it like that, and India is the evil one. So I do remember speaking to Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnan, who says that we should learn from how Pakistan is doing it. And if we can decode how they are doing it, maybe India can do it too, because India nowadays, from our side, it's not enough. We are not to counter perception warfare. So, what would you like to speak on that, man?
General Hasnan was one of my respondents for my second book. We had a deliberation on this as well. And when we talk about, and I still firmly stand on my grounds as a practitioner of media and as a researcher of media, see what have they got? If let us see from a Pakistan perspective. you have created a world around them, projecting yourself as mighty souls. But in reality, when the United States president looks towards South Asia, it is Indian PM. Now that defeats the entire purpose of their perception management. Rather, I would say that it is not perception management, it is befooling people, which no government should do. If the Prime Minister of Pakistan is being elected by the vote, by the people have put their trust and faith in that individual, and through rather than using television as we used, Indian used, like side project by Indira Gandhi, where the TV and satellites were used for education purpose. What have they reduced that technology into? A mouthpiece. Look at the illiteracy rate, the mortality rate. So you can befool your own people because you are just subjecting them to a TV channel created by you, where the script is created by you, where the anchors are saying what you want them to say, but the ground reality is very different. And if you see from India's perspective and the way we have projected ourselves, we have projected ourselves as a very responsible nation. That is international truth. And I would rather say that because of our functioning, whether it's our responsibility towards, I do not think because PTV is telling Pakistan is a responsible nation, that international community will believe that yes, nuclears are safe with Pakistan. So that's, I think that's a very interesting topic. Rather, I would write another essay or an article on it. But I still say that I will still say that it can be a country bias, but my own interaction with Indian journalists and the kind of language, the courtesy, the knowledge, and I would say which I had to see from the other side. I mean, it is very easy to create a program like in Animal Farm sort of novel, where you are creating an environment where you're putting up a people and you're just feeding them with information. And even internationally, you can see the after. See, perception can be there for a while, but at the end of the day, it is a real result. I can show you a mango tree and can tweak your perception that it will give apples, but at the end of the day, the mango will come. So you can use perception for a while, but at the end of the day, it's a lot of merits of a nation, that collectively how a nation is working to be more responsible nation, to increase their, strength. It is something which you can see. It is not something which is which of just giving 3 photographs. You cannot, because the reality will eventually come out. So they can do this thing within inner population, and I was, in fact, while I was doing Kargil, I realized that people of Pakistan were watching Indian television more than Pakistan television, and they have more faith in what Indian channels are telling them during Kargil rather than their own TV channel. So right. We have Magsaysas award winners. That kind of quality journalism we are having. And we should. There are like any other, any other industry or any other organization, there are flaws, and we are collectively trying to help through research, through these discussions, not only to highlight that flaws but also give solution to that problem. Over to you, Rahul.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Now, at this point of time, when we are discussing perception and perception warfare, the idea of how media aids terrorism, like how terrorism has used media to propagate, to actually reaching out to masses. So at this point of time, it would be great if you could highlight a bit on the concept of digital terrorism.
Yes, I forgot I've written that chapter in my book, to be honest. That's a problem. I write and I forgot what I have written. Yes, digital terrorism was, I think it's the 6th chapter in my book, and I'll just quickly take you through. It is how choreographing of the terror is being done by digital platform. See, if you want to terrorize people, you have to create that fear in their mind. It's an old concept. Media is something which, because media gives them an oxygen, because if people are not observing or they're not in news, so there is no value to their efforts or whatever they want to do. When we talk about digital terrorism, it's a paper which tells how internet is being used as a dual weapon, where in one hand the internet is providing us with so many facilities, information, making us smart societies. On the other hand, how extensively it is being used by terrorist organizations. And I also told about how the present digital platform is becoming very vulnerable, which you also have discussed when we were talking about ISIS and all. And I also spoke about how, especially when you discussed about Mumbai 2011 attacks, which I have mentioned that how Lashkar-e-Toiba used Google Earth extensively to plan their attacks, and how different kind of social media platforms are being used for online radicalization of the people who are in it. So this particular, and I also mentioned about the use of social media by ISIS and how that was a shift in a propaganda, and how Al Qaeda use its media platforms and how extensively ISIS is using its social media platform. And again, the effort of any terrorist organization is creating awe and shock, and digital platform comes cheap to them, easy, and the reach is very, very extensive. You also, if I connect it from now lone wolves concept, a lot of digital plays a very important role in that too. And then I've also discussed in this book that how digital terrorism in Afghanistan, how is it working there, the effects of digital terrorism, and how it is weakening public support of national building. See, a terrorist need to do one incident, and in that incident, he will make messages viral, use every sort mechanism to convince the internal public that this government is weak. The same thing is resonating itself in my this recent paper that I'm writing, that how terrorist organizations are using online platforms to tap on disgruntled people who are under lockdown or where there are human rights violation, especially due to COVID-19. So this is something which I can say the present chapter which I'm writing and this chapter when I'm reading, it's an extension. This is how it is evolving. And we have seen that how they have, even when we see from the digital terrorism perspective, that they are using sophisticated digital mechanism. They are creating their strategies, digital strategies, just like online marketing strategies, to ensure that their message is reaching. But the counter for digital terrorism is the need of an hour, where any enemy propaganda has to be countered by a positive propaganda. The answer to a propaganda is another propaganda, another strong narrative, rather I would say, where we have to, and another important thing that I will like to add, which I've mentioned here in my chapter, that we also have to make the people who are consuming digital products, say, or you can say social media, we have to literate them, we have to teach them, we have to make them understand that everything what you are seeing in social media can be fake, it can be a part of a propaganda. You are going and liking a page, that page might look as a very noble cause, but if you will dig further, who made that page, who is giving those messages, then you will find altogether that there was a different intention in creating that page or those online petitions. So this is something that I have touched on in this chapter of digital terrorism. Over to you, Rahul.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. You mentioned the role of how the terrorist organizations in Afghanistan are using media to propagate their ideas and ideologies. In fact, I do remember speaking to the Taliban spokesman, and who was very bright and showcasing everything from good governance to gender equality in Taliban administrated areas in Afghanistan. And yeah, at one point of time, I asked him, Saab, will you guarantee the presence of women in your negotiating teams during the Afghan peace talks? And he was like, yes, Taliban is all for equality. In fact, he did send me 3-4 documents on how Taliban is promoting equality and good governance. But when the Doha talks started, I called him up again. And then I was like, Saab, you guaranteed women participation. Where are women in your team? So I believe this is something how terrorist organizations are actually showcasing themselves. Especially in case of Afghanistan, Taliban is no longer showcasing themselves as the ruthless, barbaric people that they used to be in 99 and 2000s, but rather a responsible political group with good motives of governance and actually good governance. Sometimes they claim themselves to be better than the Afghan government themselves. So this is something very interesting that has developed in Afghanistan over the period of time, especially the development of media. Like Taliban has their own political office Twitter page, they have their own Instagram accounts, and they showcase how Taliban is doing good in Afghanistan and how the government is failing to meet the needs of the people. Thank you.
Your voice is breaking.
Now, is it clear now? Sorry.
Yes, it is.
Right. So now there's a chapter in a book, chapter 9 to be very specific, that discusses the use of social media by defense personnel for personal use. Like a few months back, there was an order wherein social media platforms were banned for defense personnel. I'm like, it would be great if you could highlight the topic.
Yes, sure. This is was something which I was writing while I was experiencing my own, because I've even at a social media, I'm more of a researcher and less of a social media user. I was one day just sitting down and looking at the social media, and I'm part of a lot of different groups of social media to defense, related to defense or defense families. And then I realized so much of information flowing. I can see the checkout reports, the check-in reports, the location of the people, their relatives, their immediate family members, everything on social media. And that is where I experienced the problem. I saw the problem that, uh, see, the boundaries are very blurred. Okay, when we talk about social media, the reality is very blurred. We we are still trying to understand what social media is. We post so many things without even realizing that there can be consequences to it. And that was a motivation behind writing this chapter 9 on the application of social media by defense personnel for their personal use, where I have tried to give them some uh, suggestions. That what information or updates that you are sharing, if I can see it on social media, somebody else can see, can get access to it. And especially with regards to their location, frequent places of their visit, these are unwarranted information that's not required for them to give. Another important thing that I shared, I wrote in this paper, was about the sharing part. We are, because technology have given us that instant feeling of sharing something, that we hardly check what we are sharing. We just share without even realizing whether it's a fake, mis, or disinformation. So this is something that I have advised. And then another thing which I have suggested, that stop believing everything what you're seeing on an online platform. And I want to bring another example. Later on, I wrote a paper on it, on Pakistan use of fake news, how a media propaganda against India. There was some tension in Indo-China border, and there was a fake news floating that 104 defense personnel were killed through one rocket attack. And that was shared by somebody from the defense only. And that numbers were like unbelievable numbers. I immediately went to that link, checked it, and realized that it was a YouTube by a Pakistani channel and a part of a false propaganda. Now you see that in hurry of sharing an information without even checking whether it was authentic or not, it was shared in those platforms where there were a lot of defense people. So I saw a major problem, and this is what I even suggest, that please, whenever you're sharing something, kindly it does not take much time. Just Google it once to see whether it's authentic or not. And I also spoke about viral hoax, the floating messages on social media, especially on Facebook. They're ridden with malware, so one should avoid it. And also the social media. We can't gag people simply because they belong to one organization. But I think instead of gagging people, it is better to tell them that these are the cons, to make them literate for using a particular tool. At the end of the day, social media is a tool. Like, I need training for every tool that I'm using. So when we are using something like social media, which can be very lethal, there should be some amount of literacy or some amount of training to be given to those people who are using it. And I also suggested that one should not gag people, but if there is a requirement, if you see that people are not understanding the reason, or a lot of information is flowing out which should not be in a public domain, then there is no other way out to stop the information to go out, because of course national interest is paramount. And then there need to be a continuous campaigns or training sessions or workshops which talks about bringing awareness about when you're using social media. I've also suggested that your personal life, especially family life, details, posting details, or any kind of movement of troops or something, it should not come at all. I mean, not even in a selfie. For you, it might be a selfie, but for a person who's tracking you, you're giving the location to that person. And not to use their personal numbers or details or check-in check-out locations on social media. And also this is something which needs continuous a continuous training or a continuous monitoring as well. So this was my attempt while I was writing this particular chapter, to bring some kind of suggestions and for those people who are using social media. Over to you, Rahul.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Now, speaking of this, we also see how social media and media, especially digital media, has actually played a very important role in helping people during the time of crisis. One such crisis was the floods, and followed by Operation Meghrahat. And I also see that you have actually written a chapter on that. So it would be great if you could shed some light on your views.
Yes, I tried to. This was little theoretical chapter, because where I was trying to correlate, bring a relationship between a media dependency theory and Ops Meghrahat. I tried in this chapter that how media plays an important role, and how media and other organizations are also dependent on each other. And this particular dependency was exhibited very nicely during Ops Meghrahat. And I brought out how different social institutions came together, including media also, when this Ops Rahat was happening. How when the country was hit by a natural calamity, where not only a disaster management was happening or rescue operations were happening, media also played a crucial role. And I also spoke about that how during this calamity, we saw a fair example of media dependency theory. The central point of the theory states that people in modern society depend on media to comprehend and understand the world around them. And media, through its continuous reporting, were able not only to tell the people what was happening actually on ground, but they also brought out how different challenges are being faced by military while doing and those agencies which were in rescue operations. So they had done, I won't say an excellent job, but they've done a fair enough job where they have assisted a lot of people. As per an Indian Army official statement, an estimate of 12,000 people were assisted only on basis of reports received over social media. So they created their own groups, subgroups. Not only this, even while my second book, when I was interacting with my defense people, I realized that there have been many occasions on which media have given them a lot of information. Media personals who have their own network in those localities have given them a first-hand information. And this is an official report that 12,000 people were assisted just on the basis of the information which was coming from social media. So we saw that how different entities with different objectives worked together, were dependent on each other, and faced this very challenging situation in crisis. So this was one chapter on Ops Meghrahat, where I tried to relate it to media dependency.
At this point of time, I do have a question. And this question is from Srilekha, who is the Director Strategic Outreach for Raisina House. Srilekha, I would request you to please ask the question.
Good evening, ma'am. Thank you for a wonderful, wonderful session. Congratulations on the book launch. I thoroughly enjoyed all the answers that you gave, and it provided me insight. So, the quick question, it's a very broad question. It is what do you think, I mean, briefly, is the role of media, especially social media, in in conflict resolution and negotiations? That's my first question. And second quick question is, how do you think the media, again, especially the social media, shapes the public opinion, and what kind of implications does it have on policy making? Do you think it disrupts the policy making process? Because, like you mentioned again, we have very little time for response. So, how do you think then it affects the public policy in general? Ma'am, you're on mute.
I will write it down first. Your first question is with regard to media and social media.
Yes, media and social media in conflict resolution and negotiation. And second is with respect to public policy and shaping public opinion.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the compliments. And I'm very glad you asked me this question. Media, social media, media. If we talk about conflict resolution, we have to understand one major difference between when we talk about media and social media. There are a lot of medias, but primarily, when you talk about media, you mean print media, television channels, and social media. Am I correct? Yes. If I will take it one by one. If I'm taking media for conflict resolution, then yes, they can create narratives. They can bring different stakeholders on television panels, on news channels, and bring different views and opinions as op-ed, and inform the public that this conflict is happening. Bring together different people on a same platform. I'm talking only about electronic media or a print media. Okay, I will address social media later. So yes, when we talk about conflict resolution, there are parties who are not ready to talk to each other or have difference of opinions, bringing them together on one common platform. Like this is also one platform where we are bringing different people together and deliberating does give a very good option for conflict resolution. If media can be held responsible for conflict, if we see radio was during Ravada, that radio was seen as a culprit. Media can also play a very positive role when it comes to conflict resolution. It can help people in understanding what the conflict is about, how things have evolved, what kind of, by bringing different perspectives, that what kind of steps can be taken or remedies can be given to those people who are conflict. Now, coming to your social media. Now, you have to understand that social media is user-generated content. Unlike in print, where there is an editor bay, or in a news channel, there's an editorial which is closely watching and monitoring each and every content. In social media, it is left on the mercy of the people who are using it and the intention of the people who are using it. Suppose it is a Twitter handle or a social media handle of a rice in a house. You will always churn out, like I keep on seeing a lot of articles coming from your end. We'll keep on churning out those articles or those policy briefs which help a policy maker in constructing or giving an answer to a problem. But then it is again on the mercy of a social media user who will be exploiting it to his or her advantage. So that completely depends on how social media users are creating the content and how those people or those platforms like Facebook, what kind of policies they are adopting, whether they are letting these people grow that kind of narrative, whether they are allowing people to grow that narrative, and it is very easy to check media, but it is very difficult to check social media because the users are generating that content. In fact, I was 3-4 months back, I was in a talk where I was listening that how one particular social media handle is a social media platform is continuously promoting those handles which are anti-Indian. So it again boils down that who are those people who are populating social media and who are those platforms? What are the policy of Facebook? What are the policy of Twitter when they are addressing conflict related issues? So this is one way where we can see that. Now, coming to your policy, again, the same argument. If it is your electronic media, your television or your print media, you can bring across people from different spectrum. You can deliberate on a problem. You can bring out solutions. You can communicate those solutions to the people who are sitting there and who can make some policy changes or introduce some new policies. And when we talk about social media, yes, I do see that if there is anything which comes new, there is a lot of criticism about the people, even without understanding what that is. So there's a lot of text population is happening. People are writing even without understanding the context in which that policy is formed. So that is a bigger challenge for the government agencies. What my understanding is, abhi bhi kitna bhi, whatever the report is, a person goes back to a news channel to understand what is the problem, what is this entire issue about that. And Indian news channels, especially, that will be another debate altogether. When we talk about policy making or things related to bring out good policies for the government, that is the time where the social media handles of those agencies who are introducing that policy should be very, I would say, proactive. They should churn out the content or the counter narrative or the correct points or their positioning about that policy much before, in order to ensure that people who are in social media spaces have an alternative, authentic way in which they can get more information about any policy which is coming. I hope I'm able to answer your question, Shrelekha.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, totally. Thank you.
Most welcome.
No, thank you.
What you, Rahul?
Yeah, thank you very much for the answers. Now, when I have spoken of how people look back to the media and media channels to know what actually the problem is, or to get a fair point of view, a problem that has been coming up not only in India but other countries as well is the problem of yellow journalism, or fake news, or paid news. And I believe I see you have written a chapter on the issue. The paid news occurs on news journalism. I truly believe that it is actually an anathema for the whole country, which looks so dearly to its media. So, what are your views that you have highlighted in the chapter? It would be really interesting to know.
Yes, this was a chapter when I was writing, and I realized that it is something. See, all these terms, paid news, yellow journalism, it's basically a human psyche. We as an individuals want to tweak something to our advantage, or we want to highlight something, so that also shows in the journalism. Yes, when I was writing this paper, it's an old publication, and I was going through. There were some elections which were happening, and I was seeing that how different political parties are bringing out their news, and how this paid news, and that is from where I started. That it is not something which is which is new to the society. It has been very long. It has been complicated and deep-seated problem, and it has a serious dimension. Now, it also brings out the corruption in individual journalists, and also corruption in some of the media companies who are using their structures, existing structures, not in service of journalism, but using them for paid news. And I give a viewpoint of Press Commission of India. How do they see paid news? And then I also tried to figure out what are the major reasons behind this paid news. There is like corporatization of media, media ownership issues, editorial roles, the decline in autonomy of editors and journalists, contract system, poor wage system. Lack of political will was also one of the things that I identified when I was writing this paper. And then I also spoke about that the regulatory bodies like News Broadcasting Standard Authority or PCI, they also lack the power to deal with it. I think that brings more ambiguity. That one of the reason is who's going to define whose jurisdiction. If there is a paid news, who's going to identify it, and what will be the next course to stop it or to make the person accountable to it. And then I also spoke about that how These are how political parties are also investing money in shaping people on these news. And then I also spoke about the remedy. One of the remedy that I thought that it is a responsibility, it's a collective responsibility, not only of the media people, but of the society also. This is, there's a concept called news literacy. If you're consuming something, you should know what it is. If you are picking up something to eat, you always check the content. You always see whether it's fresh or not. Sorry. So when you are consuming something as serious as news, you need to understand whether it's a paid news, whether it's a part of a propaganda, and that is where news literacy is something that I keep on re-emphasizing in most of my lectures, that this is something which is required. And also, I've given the remedies. I've given around 6-7 remedies in the end of in the end of this chapter. Over to you, Rahul.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Now, there are two chapters, chapter 12 and 13, which actually speaks about news reporting in time of crisis and how perceptions are made during a crisis. So it would be really interesting if we could club the two case studies, the one from Afghanistan and the other from the Paris attacks.
Yes, my last two chapters were, one was on Afghanistan and one was on the Paris attack. I would request Rahul if you can repeat it, because in between I missed your voice.
So both these chapters speak of how narratives are built or narratives are showcased during a time of crisis. Both the massive ordnance blast in Afghanistan and the Paris attacks from the prison of social media. So how do you believe these two can be expressed briefly?
Yes, in this, what I have done, one is when this massive ordnance air blast in Afghanistan happened, and I was very intrigued to know how different kind of countries, different kind of medias are tracking it. And when US dropped this bomb, and immediately I started checking what the global news has to say. And what I came to know that US had a different way of highlighting it as a power projection. Russia, on contrary, said that Russian have done a bit. Russian have a better bomb, and this particular bomb, which mother of all bombs, what it was being said in short form, was just a psychological weapon. And China, on the other hand, its official mouthpiece just reported that there is a strike. So they were underplaying this particular thing. When I was looking at the Middle East, I realized that they have given extensive reportage of this coverage, and they presented that how this ultra heavy explosive have destroyed that particular portion, and how around 15,000 of fighters are estimated to have been affected. But the most interesting part was when I was looking at ISIS website, so their news agencies, who denied any casualty, who said nobody died in that particular blast. So it was very exciting to see how different kind of media, United States, Russia, China, Middle East, Afghanistan, ISIS were reporting for a similar incident. Of course, everybody have their own agenda. It was very clearly reflecting when I was seeing different countries that how they're pushing their own agenda. Some of them are pushing themselves as a power projections, that they are the superpower. Then other are saying it's just a psychological thing which is happening. Then there was another incident which happened, was the Paris attack, where I was seeing that how social media was used by the people who were part of that, who became the casualty or the victims of that particular thing. And also, not only I brought it out that how different kind of misinformation started floating out when Paris attack was happening. Unverified, manipulated content was there. And then there was a lot of debates which was going on social media when this particular attack was happening. So the idea behind writing this paper was to highlight how social media was used by a particular community for instigating people, for hoodwinking people, and on one hand, and how on the other hand, the same social media was used to help each other during this particular attack. So if I want to sum up, the idea was to see or to bring out that how one single incident, when it was happening, how it is interpreted by different media from different countries with different set of agendas, how they are looking at the same event, same incident, and how they're reporting it to their advantage. So this is how I would like to sum those two chapters.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Now coming back again to the freedom of media. You have written a chapter, the chapter 11, the 11th chapter of the book, that is taking the case study of Poland's new media law and its implications on Polish press freedom. Do you think that the same implications can actually be generalized?
No, I think every case of every country is different. Every country have a different culture. Every country have a different understanding of freedom. We are conditioned to understand freedom differently. So when this particular chapter, when the new media law was introduced, and I wanted to just see that what kind of implication it is going to have in the Poland media landscape. So I would say that, again, it was also a controversial law for them as well. And I also tried to give the present political milieu when this was particular thing was happening. I also spoke about the landscape in brief, and how this contemporary status was related to Poland freedom of expressions, especially during 2015. Coming back to your question, I think the same kind of thing it happened in India will have a different outcome, or in that any country it will differ. Not one size fits all. Okay, so like if you see freedom of expression for say United States of America, especially after Pentagon Papers, now they see freedom of media very differently. The way we believe in sort of social responsibility while we are addressing the issue, and they are about free press. They can write anything and everything. So I can't say that that can be generalized, because every different population with different set of belief, culture, interpretation of freedom will have a different response. That will be my answer to your question. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. But this I want to open the floor for questions from the audience. So if there are any, you can write your name in the text box and I will call you up. Okay, I can't see any.
Either my
So
book
with
was
this,
too good, everybody understood, or yes,
yeah,
Ram.
actually, this is the first time no questions. This is only question. Okay, so
Thank you. Yes, I'm unable to hear you, Rahul. Your voice is breaking.
okay, so we actually have a question. The name is displayed as IMG Venture. So maybe you can unmute your mic and ask the question.
Yeah, I am that. I just log in from the another ID. I'm so sorry for that, ma'am.
Yes, please go ahead. My objective was your question. I can see that you started writing on this topic. Thank you for this question. And one of my objective when I was going through a lot of Indian textbooks, and Indian media related books, I realized we are still seeing new media as new. Now, new media became new way back in 1990s. It's 2020. And I realized while going through a lot of different syllabus of universities that there's hardly any talk during that time when I started writing on virtual journalism, augmented reality, drone journalism, social media, soft power. So the intention, the objective behind was to create a comprehensive book. I won't say it was able to bring out everything, but while I was writing those essays, those were something which was happening in the Western countries, which I realized that our own literature is lacking. So the objective was to bring different technological advancements which are happening in the field of media, to convert it into a book and an easy reading for those who are interested in it. Am I able to answer your
Basically,
question?
basically it is for us, right? Because we are in the learning stage. You are already up to that stage, so it is very comfortable and the most reliable reading while reading your book, right?
Yes, it is. And also, I catered for not only research scholars or college-going media, budding media students, but also I kept in mind the practitioners of social media, especially keeping in mind the national security. So there are chapters which are talking about how people who are practicing social media from defense background need to cater few things in their minds and so forth.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank, thank you so much. I can see another question. We talk
Yes,
about
we have
national
Akshay
security.
Upmanyu. Yeah,
We talk about national security. Then,
yeah.
is it necessary in a country like India that media needs to be regulated regularly? Akshay, that's a tough question. It should be self-regulated. Will be my answer. The self-regulated and the responsibility for anybody who picks up a pen and who sees himself as a journalist. It needs to come from within. That whatever I'm writing will be read by a lot of people. So that responsibility, the first person who picks up the pen while they are writing something, whether the authenticity of that news, the authenticity of the sources, following the principle of journalism, balance of reporting, keeping aside your own biases, that self-regulation is something that I again and again emphasize. It should be from within. I hope
Okay,
I'm
ma'am.
able to answer the question.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, I
Thank you
just
so much.
want to ask, as a media student, it is a role of media to aware about each and every happening about the country to their viewers, right? So somewhere it is also threatening our country, because if we give each and every news to the somewhere terrorists and the other organization which are not good for us, they are getting information from that media perspective, and they are using that particular news and particular information against us.
See, that is the battle of narrative, which I have spoken on the book, in my book. And that is a continuous thing. I'm going to churn out something, there will be a counter to it. It's a vicious cycle. It's a never ending thing. And yes, like coming back to what I said, it is a responsibility of a person who's creating the content to see it holistically. And but then there is another principle that I will give you an example that while I was doing my research, the news report on bulletproof jackets. Now, if you see from a security point of view, why should we write that the people who are defending our country are not having proper equipments? But then somebody have to ask, the question is not to question the person or the messenger. It is his job to bring out the rot of the society out. It's a job of a journalist to get inside the gutters of society. I'm quoting here as one of my respondent who told me this thing, Praveen Swami sir. I could quote that it is a responsibility of the journalist to get inside the gutters of the society to bring out what is rotting in the society. Just because somebody who wants to put a carpet on it and you are highlighting as a journalist only the carpet, you are not true to your job. So coming back to that question when he wrote about the bulletproof jackets, so that is something which needs to be addressed. Just saying that, oh, you have brought out this issue into light. Because it came into light, that's why they were policy makers, they were deliberation that we need to address this issue before it is being exploited by somebody else. So this is where media person need to do his job and the people in power need to do their job. That will be my answer to your question.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Of question. We will thank Dr. Singh.
I'm unable to hear you. Your voice is.
Uh, So I would like to thank Chris Singh for joining us and discussing this very interesting book, which is widely available on flipkart.com. So if you have not got to go live and order it today, right? So this is the end of this very nice session. Bye, Prakriti. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raisina. And thank you so much, dear audience, to be here.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We will definitely read it and then I will get back to you with many more questions.
Most welcome. Questions are always welcome. Thank you so much.